As the Roy of the Rebbe to learn Hilchos Abchira in Yemei Ben HaMetzorim, we have to also know the Roy is also to give tzedakah and tefillah, so everybody should give tzedakah. We have the honor today to have one of the senior Melamdim, Talmid, the nicht der Talmid Vosik, a Melamed Vosik in unserer Kehille, in unser Cheder, Harav Achosid, Harav Chaim Berkowitsch, that will give us some insight into the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Harav Berkowitsch, bevakasha.
Okay, as we are hearing every night that the Rebbe requests that we should learn now these times about the Beis HaMikdash. One of the things that we learn is Masechtas Nidus, which is a Mishnayos, which teaches us about the second Beis HaMikdash. I was given the merit and the schus to teach the Talmidim of our Camp Gamenachem, our Bank Aleph Talmidim, start them off with Mishnayos. This is the nicest gift that we can give them. Start learning with them Mishnayos, something that they don't learn the whole year. And we learned about the Beis HaMikdash, and it's something that they really enjoy, and they do with a lot of chayas. And as I'm teaching it and preparing it, there's a lot of interesting things that come up, a lot of questions that come up that the chayda could use a little clarification, and that's all that I want to share over here. I'm not going to go into any big long list and papulim over here, just very simply to clarify certain things that can come up. So I'll go through the first two Mishnahs, because the first two Mishnahs have a shaykhus one with the other. They speak about the shaylim, the guards that would be guarding the Beis HaMikdash. And we'll stop on a few things to clarify it. So the first Mishnah starts telling us that the Shloshim HaKaimis HaKahanim Shayim in the Beis HaMikdash. There are three places in the Beis HaMikdash that the Kehanim would be guarding, although usually the Levim guard. But there are three places that the Kehanim guard, and the Mishnah explains the Beis HaPinas, the Beis HaNitzotz, or the Beis HaMoikot. These are the three places that the Kehanim are guarding. Then the Levim and the Levim, the Esmer that they guard 21 places. And the Mishnah starts clarifying what these places are. Chamisha, 5 Levim, al Chamisha Sharei Harabayis, by the 5 gates of the Harabayis. The gates means the big openings where you go past into the Chema, onto the Harabayis. So there were 5 of them by the Harabayis, and each one of them had one of the Levim guarding. Arba, there were 4 Levim, al Arba Pinois and Mitaychai, by the 4 corners, but in the inside corners, that means on top of the Harabayis itself, in the inside corners. Chamisha, there were another 5 al Chamisha Sharei Azara, going closer to the Azara. There were 5 Levim by the 5 gates of the Azara, and there was a certain night that was clarified that speaks about how many gates there were and why it's mentioned 5 and other places mentioned 7. We're not going to get into that now. Arba, there were 4 Levim al Arba Pinoi Sehu Mibachutz, by the 4 corners of the Azara, but this time it was from the outside. Unlike by the Harabayis that they were from the inside, this time they were guarding from the outside of the Azara. Soon explained why and everything. And then there was another Levi Belishkas HaKarban in a place called the Lishkas HaKarban, the Echad Belishkas HaPareches, one by the Lishkas HaPareches, the Echad LaChoyre Beis HaKafayres, and there was another one behind the area of the Beis HaKafayres, which is the Kachei Kedoshim. We're going to try to clarify all these things, exactly where they are, and the different interesting things that come out from that. We're going to go straight to the second Mishnah, where it speaks about Ish Harabayis, the one who was in charge of the Harabayis, he was in charge of all the guards. The Mishpar, he would go around to all the guards, he would have torches and flames before him. Any guard which is not standing, the Ish Harabayis would tell him Shalom Alecha. He would tell him Shalom Alecha. Right over here, the Yisrael explains, he would tell him Shalom Alecha. Let's see, okay, the Ulai Nechlash Yafalakum, could be he's weak and he can't stand, and that's why maybe he sat down or he lied down. Or Ulai Baal Machshavah, could be he's just he got carried away with his thoughts. The Ish Harabayis is going to ask him, like Shalom Alecha, give him a wake-up call and see if he's awake. Nikar Shehu Yashan, if he doesn't respond, he sees that he's sleeping. He would bang him with a stick, with a shusay, we have permission to burn his clothing. As I explained, that's if he takes off his clothing and he makes like a mattress or a pillow out of it, that means he mamish was mazed and he went down to sleep, which is against the respect of that he's supposed to have to the Beis Hamikdash, so he would be able to burn the clothing after he took it off and whatever. And then it says over there that the other guards around would say, Ma koil ba'azara, what's going on in the Azara? What's this sound and banging that we hear? So they would say, Kol ben Levi leika, this is the sound of a Levi, a guard who's getting killed, of a god of this Raven, and his clothing are getting burnt, because he's sleeping while he's supposed to be guarding. And then it concludes by saying that Eliezer ben Yaakov Eimer, Eliezer ben Yaakov says that this taka happened once. They once found the brother of my mother sleeping. B'sar was to saying the taka burnt his clothing. Okay, so interesting to go to the Rav, the Barkanura. We'll go back to Mishnah Aleph, and he mentions about al arba k'nesel mebachutz. Why was it that by the Azara, the corners where they were guarding were by the outside corners, unlike by the Harabayas, they were guarding in the inside corners? So he answers like this: that yeshiva ba'azara. You're not allowed to sit in the Azara. Elo l'malchus ve'david bovad. Only to the kings that come from the family of David HaMelech. Interesting line. He says that it's not possible for a guard to guard standing the whole night. Therefore, that's why the guards were b'pinas ha'azara, by the corners of the outsides, because outside you are allowed to sit. Inside the Azara you're not allowed to sit. So they kept them outside. They should be able to sit. By the Shari Azara also, by the gates of the Azara, they weren't inside, but they were in the outside part, so they should be able to sit. They should be able to sit over there. So the Chayda, and Emerson is, this thing that they were sitting outside is miyusad on the Gemara in Masechtas Tamid. Masechtas Tamid, right over here, it's Daf Chav Zayin, Amud Aleph. Daf Chav Zayin, it's the beginning of Masechtas Tamid, but the numbers over there, the way they count it starts with a daf and starts here from Masechtas Ne'ilah. So it's, but really it's in the beginning. There's a second daf over here. It says, what's the difference to Azara Davinim B'chutz that we do it in the outside, in the garden on the outside? Amra Harabayis the Itama Oboyu Mesav Yosef, the Harabayis, which means outside the Azara. That if he's tired and he wants to sit down, he could sit down. That's why they're outside. They could guard from the inside, because inside anyways he's allowed to sit. So why not let him be inside in the inside corners? Azara da Azara, the Tamba Oboyu Mesav. If he's tired and he wants to sit down, Yosef, he's not allowed to sit down. The Amar Mar and Yeshiva Bazara Elo Lamalchus Beis David Bovad. That's why you should guard on the outside. So what we get from this so far is that the guards, like the Rav says, it's impossible for them to be standing the whole night. So therefore they were sitting. So the question now is in the Mishnah, what does it mean over here? Guard is not standing. It looks like this guard is not standing, he's doing something disrespectful. So you have to tell him, he has to give him a wake-up call. They were all sitting. They were allowed to sit. That's where it comes out from now. So anyways, there is another girsa, and this girsa is also brought down in the Gemara Masechtas Tamid. And we see it on the next Amud on the bottom, where it says over there a very similar thing, but there's a small change in the word of a certain letter that's added that changes everything. It says over there like this: Tanan Hassam, we learned there Ishar Abayis Mechazal al Mishmar. The Mishmar very similar to what our Mishnah says. Bavuka is Dolkes Lefanav B'chol Mishmar She'ena Oimei V'Amr Le Ishar Abayis Shalom Alecha. So there's a vav over there, one vav. Every guard that doesn't stand and say, he doesn't stand up and say Ishar Abayis Shalom Alecha, that means the guard was sitting. When he sees the Ishar Abayis coming, out of respect, he has to get up and say Ishar Abayis Shalom Alecha. And that's what the Pshat over here means. So therefore everything seems to now make sense, that they were not able to sit, and when they see the Ishar Abayis coming, they have to stand up and say Ishar Abayis Shalom Alecha. So there's like two different girsais. And we see over here also in the Rambam also says, which is the Rambam Hutter Beis Abchira, this is all the way toward the end. It says, V'ishar Abayis Sayi Nikra V'ayim Mechazal Kol Mishmar and Mishmar Kol Laila V'vukas V'vukas Lefanav Kol Mishmar Sheina Oimei V'ayim Loi Ishar Abayis Shalom Alecha. That means Nikar Shehu Yashin. That means Adi Pashas sleeping or Chaytei B'Maklei. Interesting, just if we want to start looking to the Yukim to make a dig, the difference between the two girsais. What happens if the Ishar Abayis goes by and he sees someone sitting, a guard sitting, and he doesn't stand up? So according to the first girsa, he'll give him a second chance. He'll kind of tell him, Shalom Alecha, and see if he responds. And then, if he sees he doesn't respond, he'll give whatever malchus he has to give him because he's sleeping. But according to the second girsa, which this is the more acceptable girsa, it seems to be, that the Rambam says it very clearly, if he doesn't stand up right away, it means that he's sleeping, and they'll bang him with a stick. But anyways, we're not going to get so much into that. I want to mainly focus on the different areas where the Kahanim and the Levim were guarding. The way it comes is we see that you can make three groups out of the different guards. The first group would be the Kohanim. The second group would be 18 Leviim, which were guarding by the Sha'arim and by the corners. And then there's the last three, where it says ve'echad b'lishkas ha'karban, ve'echad b'lishkas ha'pareiches, ve'echad la'chayre beis ha'kapayis. And the reason we're saying this is because the middle 18 al pitashtas, they were not in the Azar. As it says clearly, they were in the outside area, so they were able to sit. The question is about the last three Leviim that we're going to come to soon. But first, let's try to stay with the Kohanim. Where exactly were the Kohanim guarding? Were they in the Azara or were they outside of the Azara? Al pitashtas, they were in the Azara. That's what's mentioned over here also, that in Bichlal, the Kohanim were inside and the Leviim were outside. The Rambam says it very clearly, also over here, but a little bit before that, the Rambam says, mitzvah shmirasai, sheyu ha-Kohanim shoymim b'bifnim, v'ha-Leviim b'bachutz. That the Kohanim guard inside and the Leviim guard outside. Now, right away the question can come up, if the Kohanim are guarding inside, we learned before that it's impossible for a guard to be up a whole night guarding without sitting down. And you're not allowed to sit in the Azara, so how are the Kohanim gonna survive? The Kohanim different than the Leviim. It says it means that they're all impossible. So how the Kohen is clearly that he's in the Azara. So how's he gonna be able to do it all night without sitting down? So first of all, let's just clarify what these three places are, and we'll find that there's a little bit of, we can find like a kind of a loophole that could somehow be there and they could be sitting also. So the Beis Haftinas, this was a elevated place which was right near the Sharamayim. The Sharamayim was right near the Mizbeach on the southern side of the Azara. And on the side over there was an elevated place, you have to ascend upwards, and over there was the Beis Haftinas. Beis Haftinas, that's where they were Mefatim the Kteiris. They mixed the Kteiris, and the Gemara mentions about the Beis Haftinas, that he knew a certain secret of the Mala Oshan. He didn't want to give out the secret, and he used to charge big money to make the Kteiris, because the Mala Oshan the Mala Oshan makes the smoke go perfectly upwards, like a needle, straight up, and then spread around the wherever it was going, like in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and Yom Kippur and so on, and it has to be there, and only Haftinas knew the secret. That's why he had a special room over there. It was in the elevated area, and over there the Kteiris was made and prepared and mixed, and it was all prepared over there. That was the Beis Haftinas. That was one place where the Kohen is guarding. The next place is the Beis HaNitzites. The Beis HaNitzites was a shad, it was a gate that was on the northern side, all the way by the Kaisel HaMaravi, northern side. And the reason it was called Nitzites, there's two reasons mentioned to it. One reason is because Nitzites means sparkle. It used to sparkle when the sun would shine on it, because it was very, very high. As it's mentioned, because the Beis HaNitzites was a shad, and above it there was another whole aliyah built on top of it. So it was very tall, and when the sun was shining there, it was sparkling. It's also mentioned that there was a fire burning there, that fire was going to be used if the fire of the Mizbeach goes out. Although it's mentioned that the fire was taken from the Beis HaMikdash, but that's mentioned also about the Beis HaNitzites. So over there was an area on top, and there was an area on the bottom. On the Aliyah, the Kohen would be guarding, and on the bottom, it says the lady would be guarding. So that's the Beis HaNitzites. The Beis HaMikdash is a huge big room. It says that it was shaped like a kippah haya, and in there was a lot of things happening. There was a fire burning there for the Kohanim to be warmed up, because they were walking barefoot on the cold floor. They would be able to warm up over there. And also over there, the Kohanim would be sleeping. There was like a kind of part of it was in the Kodesh, in the Azara, part of it was in the Chayil. So in the Chayil part, the Kohanim were able to sleep, and in the Kodesh part, there were other things that were happening there, and there were these Rashi Paspas in these heads of the beams that were coming through, and that with that, but they made an imaginary line where the Kodesh and the Chayil, the difference of the two parts are. So over there it says also that the Kohen would be guarding in the inside part, the lady would be guarding in the outside part. So there's the Piddush on on the Seftas Tamid, right on the side of the Gemara of the Mishnayos over there. Okay, he mentions over here like this. He says, I'll just read it from over here because Beis Haftinas u'Beis HaNitzites haya aliyos. So he says, "L'shmiras haKohanim, for the Kohanim tzarich aliyos mokim gvoya. You have to be on a high place. Even if part of them were in the Azara, the Kohanim could sit over there. When they retired, the Gagid Valiyas Loinus Kadosh, like I mentioned in the Gemara Psachim, that the roofs, the elevated areas, they were not Niskadosh. They didn't have the Kedusha of the Azara. So right away we have that that's where they were able to sit over there. So that with that we answered that Beis Haftinas, which was an elevated area, was not Niskadish, didn't have the Kedusha of the Azara, so the Kahanim were able to sit over there. Same thing as the Beis HaNitzites, which was above, elevated area, was like, so therefore they were able to sit over there. As far as the Beis HaMaikid, he doesn't mention clearly, the Kiddush over here doesn't mention clearly, but he does mention a very interesting thing that we don't find anywhere else. He says that the Beis HaMaikid, the kippah, that normally we learned that kippah, it was shaped like a kippah, or it had a kippah on top. In the older styles, then they used to make many times like a dome on top of the buildings over there. That was the kind of style they would build with. That's normally the meaning of kippah. But he says differently. He says that it was built al gabe kippah. It was built on top of a kippah to elevate it, so the kohen should stand on a higher place. But he doesn't say that that's the reason that the kohen was able to sit there, which is interesting. But maybe that's what he refers to or not. But either way, what we have from this is that the kohanim were able to sit wherever they were guarding because they were in an elevated area. Now the Ravid, right on the side over here, asks a few questions out. First of all, he brings down the same thing also. He brings it down in the name of two Mefarshim, two Rishonim, the Shmuel Chassid and the Yitzchak B'Reb Shmuel, that it says that they both say that the Beis HaFinas and Beis HaNitzos Vaya Aliyos, they should be able to sit there. That's why they were in elevated places. So he asked a few questions there. First of all, very nice, you fixed up the Kehanim. How about the Leviim that were guarding on the bottom? Either you would say that the Leviim were mamish on the bottom inside of the Azara. How are they going to guard? They're standing on the ground of the Azara. And besides that, the Beis Haftinas, where they made the Ketaidas, had to be in the Azara. Because the Ketaidas is considered Kodesh Kodashim. And we know that anything which is Kodesh Kodashim, which goes out of the Azara, becomes possible, it can be used. It's disqualified. So therefore, Apipashtis, the Beis Haftinas had to have the Kedusha of the Azara, because the Ketaidas was made over there. So we're back again, if the fighters that had the Kedusha of the Azara, how were they able to sit over there? And then he continues to say that the places that were gagois, mamish gagois, because that's the way it normally was made, that is the taka considered the gag, is considered the roof, and it didn't have the kedusha of the Azara. However, these two places, which he mentions, that Ivan mentions, which was the Beis HaNitzos and also seemingly the Beis Haftinas, they really should have been built on the ground itself. The only problem is that it would have made that it would be very hard to go through. It was a mokin sar, that's what he mentions. It was a very narrow area, and in order to ease up that from people the crowding around there, that's why they elevated it up higher. But that doesn't negate from the fact is that it had the kedusha of the Azara. So the kedusha of the Azara was taka elevated. So therefore, all these areas had the kedusha of the Azara. So finally he answers, he says, Klol de Milza, this is the cloud, Shekachu b'chol mokem she'i efsher lasis ba'azara shum davar. If there's a place in the Azara that's impossible to do something, that the Pasuk says you have to do, the only possibility is to sitting, so then you're allowed to sit also. So he says basically that the Shainim were exempt. There's an exception, they were allowed to sit in the Azara, because it was impossible any other way. That's how the Bible concludes. So now, basically, we have a little bit of a clear understanding with the Kohanim how they were able to go through their night because they were able to sit wherever they were, although they were in the Azara. Now, the only thing now we come up is now with the next three places, and that is the place of the 19th, 20th, and the 21st Levi that's mentioned by the end of the first Mishnah. Where exactly were these places? Now, the Rambam, as we saw before, says clearly that the Levium were outside. But these three places, if anyone we take a look at the structure of the Beis HaMikdash that we explained everywhere, they were inside. So how do these two things go together? Where was the Lishkas HaKarban? Lishkas HaKarban was called the Lishkas Toloi Karban. Going back to the Beis HaMikdash, there were 4 rooms in there. One of the rooms that were in the Kodesh part was the Lishkas Toloi Karban. Over there they would prepare the Karban Tamid. And they had to prepare them before. They had to have 3 piers over there before, and that's one of the places which very clearly is in the Azara. It's in the place of the Kodesh. And the Levi was guarding them. So the Levi was in the Azara. The Lishkas HaPareiches. Where was the Lishkas HaPareiches? So he mentions over here in the Vedas Yisrael, he says that that's the place where they wove the Pareiches. Although I don't know exactly where the place is, but it was in the Azara. It's possible that this was one of the To'im The Ta'im were compartments that were not only in the Azara, they were in the Heichal. This is mamish inside of the Beis HaMikdash. Even a Kohen can't go in there unless he specifically has to do something. Not stammes like to walk in there. How did Levi get in there from into the Ta'im? I mean, that's mamish in the Heichal. The next place was Va'echad la'achoyde Beis HaKaporos, was behind the Kaporos. Behind the Kaporos was right behind the Beis HaKaporos with the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Behind there was a small opening that would go from the Kodesh HaKadoshim into the area of the Azara. There was a Yud Aleph Amos area outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim until the Kaisel Hamaravi of the Azara. Why was there an opening there? So it's mentioned in the Seftas Vachim is because Kodesh HaKadoshim karbonis, like a karbachatas oila and a asham, could only be, they could only check the tzafin on the tzafin side. Sheftasam batzafin. Kodesh HaKadoshim sheftasam batzafin. However, all the other karbonis that are Kodesh Kalim, you can check the b'chol makam ba'azara. But it has to be by Pesach Oyel Moed. It has to be by one of the openings, like it says Pesach Oyel Moed, by the Mishkan in the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, what they made is to make it possible to check these karbonis, and that you shouldn't have to take away the place of the area of the Beis HaShchita, which was reserved for the Kodesh HaKadoshim. They would open up openings in the Heichal, around the whole Heichal, so that all these places you should be able to check regular karbonis, Kodesh Kalim. And that's why all the way in the back, by the Kodesh HaKadoshim, they also had an opening like that. And over there, a Levi would be guarding, which is mamish also in the Azara. So how do these things fit? When the Rambam says clearly that they were outside, and everyone says that they were outside. Were they inside? Were they outside? So there's just a point where, when the Rambam talks about the Levim that were guarding, the Rambam also divides it up into two parts. The Rambam over here says the Heichan Hayu Levim Shayimim, which is Halacha Ches, and he speaks about the first 18 Harishmayna Aser, the ones that were by the corners and by the gates, and then in Halacha Tes, he mentions the other three. So it's just the question is, could we make a deal from this that maybe these three were talking in the Azara, and the Rambam, when the Rambam said that they were outside, it wasn't referring to these three. L'maisa, there's a Sikha, and in the Sikha, where the Rebbe speaks about the guards, the opinion of the guards was to make the place a respectful place, because it's not simple, that you can't compare a palace of a king where there's guards where there isn't guards. And the Rebbe brings out that the main thing over here was that there shouldn't be Hesach Hadas. That means it's just like we're not supposed to forget about our tefillin, the same thing we're not supposed to forget about the Beis HaMikdash, and the Rebbe speaks about that's why they were dark at night. So the Rebbe brings out over here that the Rebbe also asks, why is it that in Masechtas Tamid he doesn't speak about the Levim? He only mentions the three Kaihanim that were guarding in the three places of the Kaihanim, and the Rebbe says because over there the main thing is the Mitzada Avodah, there shouldn't be Hesach Hadas, and with that, the three Kaihanim that were guarding inside, they already made sure that if they're there, there's no Hesach Hadas. And then the Rebbe says, Val Kain Ein Mokin Lo Gam Hachaf Aleph Mekayim Shahalaviyim Hayu Shaymrim Sheheim Hayu Shaymrim Mibachutz, and Mibachutz is with italics, I say Mibachutz. So can't go further than that. The Rebbe is saying that it means it's Mibachutz, they're outside. So the Rebbe is mitzayin over here to a sefer that's called the Ezra's Kehanim. So I managed to find it, the Ezra's Kehanim, and the Ezra's Kehanim says something very interesting. A little, but it says in a few short words. I'm just going to read a few things he says over there. He says, "Im kein al karchach loimer the bahana gimel mekayim se'elu loy hayu shayim lebazara rak bachutz baharabayis oy bechel keneged am mekayim se'elu." He says they weren't mamish by those places. That's mamish in the Azara, but they were outside of the Azara. And they were just being machadam. In other words, they were focusing their shmira to those areas. And it's mentioned also, he brings out later, the Ezras Kehanim, that the reason is because the Kutiyim, that they were making a lot of tzaras for the Yidden, and they tried to mess up things in the Beis HaMikdash, the beginning of the first Beis and second Beis HaMikdash time. So they would try to take away from the carbon tamid the steel. And that's why the Levi had to be there especially. He was standing outside, and he was focusing his eyes, looking the whole time at the Lishkas Atloim to make sure that no one somehow crawls in there to start trying to do things that aren't supposed to be done. The same thing is also with the Parechas. The Parechas is mentioned that it became once Tameh, and they needed 300 Kaihanim to Toivla, which is a tremendous tircha. And therefore, the Kutim could have tried somehow to make a Tameh, so they had to have a special Levi who was outside, as he mentions here, not inside, but he was focused with his looking at that area to make sure that no one's going to go in there. You could say the same thing, but that one that was standing one more point I just want to bring up. According to all this, that the Levium were completely outside. There's just one more question here: is what does it say in the Mishnah Beis that the Haim Ayminim Makol Ba'azara? that the Levium would say, the Shaimin would say, what's this noise in the Azara? Koil ben Levi loika. If there was no Levi guarding in the Azara, then they were all outside. What does it mean that my Koil ba'Azara? It wasn't coming from the Azara. The Azara, there were no Levi in there. And he says, Koil ben Levi loika. The Levi was getting hit. So there's other ones that say that it could have been a Kayan, but it doesn't. But the Kahanim are called Levium also, and there's a whole machlokes whether the Kahanim were under the jurisdiction of the Ishar Abayis or not. But Lamaisa, he answers this also. Ezra's Kahanim answers this, let's mention quickly, and he quotes from the Rambam, where the Rambam changes something here, and the Rambam says that the Anshe Yerushalayim were asking, Makrel Ba'azara. So he says like this, that when they heard banging, it was a big, powerful banging, with like intense hitting. So they said this must have been that someone in the Azara was caught sleeping, because or else why would this banging be so intense? It must be someone in the Azara, a Shomer, fell asleep. Lamaisa, he says over there, Ve'hein Koyin. That's what the way the Ezra's Kahanim says it over here. It says right over here. Omnam zeh rak l'fi datum shel Anshe Yerushalayim, aber l'fi emes hoya hakoil hazeh yotzeh min harabayis. Because they couldn't imagine, if a lady falls asleep outside in the harabayis, it's bad. But such hard banging, it must be coming probably from inside the Azara. That's why he says it. That's why the Rambam says that the Anshe Yerushalayim, because the Anshe Yerushalayim, they were living further away, so they couldn't really tell where the noise was coming from. Such hard banging, they said it must be from the Azara. But the Emerson is it wasn't. It was from those that were outside. So he concludes over there, we see how careful we have to be when we're guarding the Beis Hamikdash, and we have to realize that we're not allowed to fall asleep. Anyways, to conclude, throughout our goals, we got enough markers already, and now we should be joyful and carry around to the Gvul Shalema.
We need a few minyonim outside, please.